I need my team. I need my people around me. You know, my dad here, part of my family, my uncle as well, and I'm just really proud and really happy to see, you know, my dad.
Carlos Alcaraz is about to walk back onto the court that made him, and the one man who knows how to protect him, there won't be in his corner. 5 months out, the most serious injury of his career. His first Grand Slam comeback on the exact stage where he became a champion at 19, and the coach who built him watching from his living room instead of his box. If you want the truth about why that's still the case, and what Ferrero just revealed that nobody's connecting, subscribe right now, because this is the story the headlines keep dancing around. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I genuinely enjoy seeing how global this community has become. And if you want the stories behind the headlines, hit subscribe, because when August arrives, we'll already be following every step before everyone else catches up. Here's what they're not telling you. Juan Carlos Ferrero has broken his silence, not once, repeatedly across 6 months of interviews, on the single question that actually matters. Would he come back for Carlos? And the answer isn't a polite no, it isn't a diplomatic maybe. On Spanish national television in March, he said 5 words that should change how you see this entire situation. I couldn't say no to Alcaraz. Sit with that. The man who was handed a 48-hour ultimatum, who walked away from 7 years of work, who turned down 4 separate offers from top 20 players because he wasn't ready, that man just told an entire country that if Carlos picked up the phone, he'd be there. No hesitation, no conditions. So as the US Open approaches, the stakes are brutal. Alcaraz comes back cold on the biggest stage in the sport, facing his first Grand Slam comeback with a coach who's never navigated him through one. And the man who knows him better than anyone, who says he'd return in a heartbeat, is sitting at home, waiting. The only thing standing between Ferrero and that comeback box is a single person. It isn't Carlos, it isn't Ferrero, it's the one figure in this story who has never said a single word. And what Ferrero just revealed about him is the reason this chapter was never actually closed. Start with what Ferrero actually said, because the full picture is stronger than any single quote. La Sexta, March 2026, 3 months after the split, after the Australian Open win without him, after the Instagram unfollow. The interviewer asks the question everyone wants answered, and Ferrero, careful, measured, a man who chooses words like a chess player, drops the guard for one sentence. Deep down in my heart, I couldn't say no to Alcaraz. Pair that with what he told Clay from Bahrain in January, doors shouldn't be slammed shut with a blunt no. I could work with Carlos again at some point. 2 interviews, 2 months apart, same message. The door isn't closed, it was never closed. Now understand why the US Open is the stage where this gets tested. It's not a random tournament, it's where Alcaraz announced himself to the world. 2022, 19 years old, first Grand Slam, first time at world number 1, Ferrero standing in his box. It's the comeback target after a wrist injury that erased his entire clay and grass season. And it's the first major where the absence of Ferrero gets tested under real pressure. A player returning cold after 5 months out on the biggest stage in the sport with a coach who has never guided him through a Grand Slam comeback. Alex Corretja named the danger directly. When you're having doubt or not playing the right way, do you have that strong person in your corner to say what's needed? That's the question the US Open asks, and Ferrero has already described the exact terrain Alcaraz is walking into. His framework, given in April, motivation has to stay intact. When you achieve your goals, if motivation is not at 100%, then professional discipline has to come in. Read that as a man watching an injured former player from the outside. He's describing the precise psychological trap of a comeback. When the body's been broken, when the motivation wavers, the discipline has to carry you. The discipline Ferrero spent 7 years building into Carlos, the thing he's now watching someone else try to maintain. Here's the part that reveals how complicated this really is. Ferrero was asked what it'll be like to see Alcaraz again. His answer wasn't warm, it was raw. That moment will be difficult, complicated. The normal thing would be to have returned to the tour with someone else and then see him as a rival. Listen to what he's admitting. He can't just slot back in, and he can't easily move on. He's stuck, turned down 4 top 20 offers, not because he's done, but because he isn't ready to coach against the player he built. So he waits, in a holding pattern, for the one thing that would make a reunion possible. And that one thing isn't in Ferrero's control, it isn't in Carlos's either, because the reason the call hasn't come is the same reason the partnership ended. The family and the environment Ferrero named on that same La Sexta broadcast. The non-sporting clauses, the academy in El Palmar, 60 miles from Villena. The father whose authority over the professional direction of the career was the entire reason Ferrero walked away in the first place. For Ferrero to come back, that arrangement has to change, and the only person who can change it is the person who built it. French tennis insider Service Volée framed the irony perfectly back in January, predicting a reunion within the year. The Spanish genius won't manage to free himself from his sports father. Two father figures, the biological one and the tennis one, one chair in the box. For 7 years, Ferrero sat in it. Then the family reclaimed it. And now, with the US Open looming and Carlos vulnerable, the question is whether there's room for both men in Carlos Alcaraz's life, or whether the father who pushed Ferrero out will keep that chair empty no matter how much his son might need it filled. What makes this more than speculation is that Ferrero never actually left. He stayed in contact with Alcaraz's camp. He reached out after the Australian Open, after Doha, selectively, quietly, at a respectful distance, but the line is open from his side. He's not estranged, he's not bitter, he's a man who said he'd come back in a heartbeat, sitting by a phone that the environment around Carlos won't let ring. Now the honest counterweight, because it matters. Samuel Lopez is doing the job, and Alcaraz has backed him completely, called him one of the best coaches on tour, said he has his full trust. The 16-0 start to 2026 proved Carlos can win at the highest level without Ferrero in the box. The reunion predictions from Service Volée and others are speculation, not reporting. Ferrero himself called seeing Carlos again difficult. That's not the language of an imminent return. And Carlos Sr. has never said a public word about any of it, which means the obstacle framing is built from Ferrero's side and from observers reading the situation. Nobody knows if the call comes, not even the people closest to it. But the pieces are all on the board, and the US Open is where they move. Here's where it actually stands. 2 doors, 2 ways this ends, and the US Open is the threshold. Door 1, Alcaraz comes back, the wrist holds, and he plays through it with Lopez the way he played through the first half of the season. 16-0, the Australian Open, the career Grand Slam. He proves again he doesn't need Ferrero to win. The chapter stays closed. The clean version everyone settled on turns out to be the right one. Door 2 is the one nobody wants to say out loud. The comeback is harder than the highlight reels suggest. The wrist holds, but 5 months away doesn't vanish in a week. The timing's a fraction off. The matches get tight, and somewhere in a third set on Arthur Ashe, the same court where it all began, where Ferrero stood in his box in 2022, the doubt creeps in that Corretja warned about. The question of whether there's a strong enough voice in the corner, and in that moment, on that stage, Carlos Alcaraz reaches for the man who built him. Ferrero has already told us what he'd do if that call comes. He didn't hedge, he didn't qualify it. I couldn't say no to Alcaraz. So the reunion doesn't depend on Ferrero, he's answered. It doesn't depend on Carlos either. A vulnerable champion reaching for his mentor is the most natural thing in sport. It depends on the one person who built the wall in the first place. The father whose academy sits 60 miles from Villena, whose non-sporting clauses rewrote the hierarchy, whose authority over the career was the reason the box went empty. He pushed Ferrero out without saying a word, and he's stayed silent through every interview, every prediction, every month his son spent injured at home. The US Open is where that silence finally gets tested, because if Carlos needs Ferrero, really needs him, only one person can decide whether the door opens. And he's never told anyone what he'll do. And if you're here for the real story instead of the noise, subscribe, because the moment he returns, we'll be breaking it down immediately.